This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. This is Python's Paradise, your film and music show. And this is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena. And folks, I have a guest on the phone with me today that I've been familiar with for years because I'm a huge Blues Brothers fan. But this guy is a little different because he's actually been here to the Maritimes. Not quite here in Fredericton, but St. John, next town over. But it's not too often I get people actually know where we are here in Canada. But nonetheless, I've had Murphy Dunn on here back in January. I had Willie Hall back on here back in April. And now I have the wonderfully talented Lou Marini. How do you do, Lou?
I'm good, Greg. How are you, man? Everything cool?
I am just thrilled to have you. In fact, you know what? After I got done, I was doing an interview yesterday, and I was listening to your CD, your new CD, and I went up to the mall. I was talking to one of the fellows at the record store that's doing his own CD there, and he's familiar with the fact that I was doing interviews on here. And when I told him that I was doing an interview with you today, he was like, wow. Like, I showed him the CD, and he was like, man. He says, hey, we don't even have that in our inventory yet. You know, and he was just...
Well, you got to get it in there because we're really proud of it. You know, it was a labor of love, this CD, and it came about in a really organic way. We had our European booking agent had been bugging us to get new product out, and there are various contractual things because we were licensed to Dan Aykroyd and Judy Belushi to perform, and so we got clearance to make a new record, and then we approached a bunch of record companies, all of whom were very interested at first, but then when it came to putting up the money, they were less interested, and for various reasons. We had a few champions that really wanted to record us, but they already had a full agenda, and they asked us, could we wait for 9 months before we started to record, and we just didn't want to do that. And so after 6 weeks or so, this is in winter of 2016, after about March, you know, I called up all the guys in the band, and I said, you know what, let's just do it ourselves, and we'll start and put together a repertory, and the way we did it was so nice because we had first meeting was at my apartment here in New York, and all the New York guys came in, and everybody brought tunes to consider, and we sort of passed on a bunch of them, and I was the sort of the final arbiter, but mostly in total agreement with everybody. And once we sort of selected a bunch of tunes, then we assigned various guys to sort of sketch them out in a minimal way so that we could rehearse and play them and see what they felt like. And we rehearsed a couple times, and then we set a studio date, and we went in. At the it was about the second week of May, I think, was the first session, and then the second session was the first week of June, and we recorded 11 tunes in 2 days, and it was cool because we recorded in a studio called Iwi. It is what it is. It's called over in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I had recorded my own R&B band, the Nuff Brothers Band, here in New York. We're like an underground legend in New York. We don't play very often, but when we do, people, especially musicians, always come out. It's really a great band, and so I was familiar with that studio, and it turned out to be a perfect place for us. And then the engineer. As a matter of fact, we went to hear Chick Corea last night with Steve Gadd playing drums at the Blue Note here in New York. The engineer is Jay Messina, and he's one of the all-time great recording engineers, and we've been friends since the 70s. So we sort of had a perfect team in place, the perfect place, and then we got Eddie Floyd as a guest, Joe Louis Walker as a guest, Dr. John as a guest, and almost every take is either a first or second take. There's no very little overdubbing. There were a few horn fixes, but not even many horn fixes, and hardly any vocal fixes. So basically, what you're hearing on that CD is a live CD, and we also had a really joyous time making it. It was so relaxed and so easy and so mellow. And then, I fronted the money to pay for it, so we were able to book a gig at a club that we all play in a lot in New York called the Cutting Room, and we were recording on like a Tuesday and a Thursday, and we noticed that they had a Wednesday free, and we booked that night, and we paid for the cost of the first recording session on the money that we made playing that night. We sold the place out, and people just freaked out, and so it's really sweet the way it all came together,
Yes, I listened to the CD. Fell at the record store. He just reached out and he shook my hand. He was just impressed. He went down through this and all these names you mentioned, Eddie Floyd and all them. Like he knew who all these people were, and he was like, "Wow." He goes, "How did you get Lou?" But
well, Eddie toured with us
mm-hmm.
from when we started back after Belushi's death, which was like 1987 or 88. And he toured with us until about 2000, and then he decided he didn't want to. He was the rigors of the road had taken its toll a little bit. He didn't want to travel to Europe and Japan like we had been doing. So since then, we've occasionally seen Eddie, but he hasn't performed with us in a long time. And when he came into the studio, now he's got white hair. He let his hair go white. He was 80, and he sang so great, man.
Yeah.
Just sounded so killer, and it was such a delight to be with him again, because for us, I mean, he's a legendary character just in the Stax Volt pop music scene.
Yeah.
But also, he's our tried and true warrior. As a matter of fact, one of his sayings, like, anytime that we're on the road and we have a particularly arduous road trip or day of traveling, and you get to the gig and you've been traveling all day long, you've had very little rest, and now you got to jump up and put out. And Eddie used to say, "This is what we train for, men." So we still say it, always in those circumstances. Somebody in the band will go, "Well, this is what we trained for."
Well, the name of the CD is called "The Last Shade of Blue Before Black." Now, take a guess here. Is that title? I like the title, but is that kind of like the end of the Blues Brothers, or what's the story behind the title?
Well, when we were putting together all the music,
mm-hmm.
I had written that tune. That phrase sort of came into my head, and I thought I should write a contemporary sounding blues, contemporary sounding lyrics. It's we're the inheritors of a certain group of tunes. I mean, the Blues Brothers band, our repertory is classic R&B and some classic blues tunes, and those tunes are basically written by black musicians and black songwriters, and they reflect their vocabulary and their feelings and where they grew up and the era that they grew up. And so for me, when I think of writing lyrics to a blues, I think that the blues, the lyrics have to be authentic to my vocabulary and my experiences, So I wanted to write a blues that reflects my understanding of the classics of the blues genre, and at the same time is a contemporary thought about lyrically about the blues. And when that phrase came into my head, then sort of writing the lyrics of the tune, they just sort of popped out. And when we were when we had finished the last session, when we were choosing tunes, we had selected almost all of the tunes on the CD to try, and a couple more that we ended up not doing. And I wanted to play the guys that tune, but I didn't have a good recording of it, so I sang it to the band a cappella. And and this was right as we were getting ready to go out the door, and the band unanimously said, "We got to do that tune, and you got to sing it." And so that's I was happy about that, of course, and I had been doing the tune with a band that I play with in Spain, a wonderful old blues quartet called Red House. My wife is Spanish, and over the past 8 or 9 years, I've played. Every time I go to Madrid, I play 3 or 4 nights with these guys at a club in Madrid, and we sell out the club, and we have a lot of fun, and we're doing half a dozen of my tunes that I sing. And The Last Shade of Blue Before Black is one of the tunes. We do it as an encore, and we sort of do it in almost the same way that the Blues Brothers band did it. So, I was used to doing the tune, and we were there was a subtext of the realization that we're all getting a little long in the tooth. And although if you hear this band live, and of course the energy on the CD, it's a ferocious band. It really is. And so you'd never know it by listening to us. But the fact is that there's no guessing, how much longer we'll be able to enjoy each other's company and tour together. And so there was a little subtext of an elegiacal quality to it, that who knows how much longer will, especially when you think of like somebody like Dr. John, whose health has deteriorated in the past few years. And so, we feel like we're already thinking about another album, because we're very happy with Severin Records, the company that put it out, and we have a deal. We signed a deal for another album, so we're already starting to think about that. But there is. Who knows? It could be that it's The Last Shade, but it's also a good title. I remember playing it for the James Taylor Band when I first got the mixes from Jay Messina. I was on tour with James, and I think we were in Canada, as a matter of fact, because we did an extensive Canadian tour. We did it in 2 parts. We did an eastern leg, and then we did a leg in the United States. Then we came back and did a western leg. So I think we played about 20 concerts in Canada in 2016, and I remember when I was playing it that Larry Goldings, the great keyboard player, when he heard the hook, he turned to me and he said, "Now that's a good hook, Lou. That's a good hook. That sticks in your mind." So that was good. That's what we were hoping for.
Well, my favorite song on the album was The Last Shade of Blue Before Black. I really like that, and I enjoyed the album, but I like that tune the best.
Well, thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. What's your favorite song on the album?
Well, of course, I like Last Shade, but I love Mojo. I love Rusty's version of Blues in My Feet. It just makes me laugh every time I hear it.
Yep.
And we wanted there was a certain thing about the album that once we began choosing tunes, I told the cats that I want to make this sort of a gesture of appreciation to our fans and to sort of honor our history.
Yeah.
And in that regard, let's do a blues tune. So we had just seen Joe Louis Walker in Italy at a concert where we played, and he was playing at a different venue in the same town. It was a citywide concert thing, and we played in a big hall, and he was playing in a smaller club, and he was playing after us, so I went to hear him. And we talked, and we had met before, but he knocked me out, and I said, I also knew that Steve Cropper had produced a couple of his albums. So when I mentioned that we were going to do something and would he like to sing on it, he jumped at the chance. So that gave us the chance to do that Willie Dixon tune, Don't Go No Further, which is a great classic blues tune, you know. And then, you know, Alan Rubin always loved B-movie Boxcar Blues. That was Alan's, Mr. Fabulous's favorite tune.
Yeah.
And so Lee Finkelstein brought in another Delbert McClinton tune called Cherry Street. And
I love that too.
As soon as we heard it, we were like, that's Tommy, that's got pipes, Tommy McDonald written all over it, you know. And then we wanted to do something that was like a Cab Calloway, you know, but we didn't want to do another Cab Calloway tune. And Rob Paparazzi suggested, Your Feet's Too Big. And and I knew the tune, and once I thought of it, it was like, that's perfect. And, you know, we started it off with bass harmonica, which sounds so cool. And then Rusty played Fats Waller's original solo. And then we came up with this lovely rumba way to do it. And then I transcribed the clarinet solo from the original record and harmonized it for the three horns and played it on clarinet. And which was another gesture, another gesture of respect and reverence for our fathers in the music, you know, and the whole album is really like that, you know. There's a lot, and I like the original tunes too. Rob's tune on about the 21st century blues, about his babe is totally into social media and never gets her phone out of her face, and you know, it's sort of a funny comment on that. And then when Dr. John came in, you know, I had played with Mac for about 10 years, from the late 70s through the late 80s, you know, from about 78, 79 maybe till 89. And every time he came to New York, I was sort of the honcho of the band. And we had a great band with Lou Soloff, my recently deceased great trumpet player friend from my Blood, Sweat, and Tears days, and the great baritone saxophone player Ronnie Cuber. And you know, it was so much fun playing with Mac, and Mac is he occupies an exalted place among musicians. He is a beloved character, you know, and everybody not only respects his music but loves him and his persona. And so when he walked in the studio, he was just a glow, you know, and the feeling was so great. Everybody was so happy to see him. But then when he started playing the tune, he was playing it like a third of the tempo of the original record, you know. And I had transcribed the original horn parts, which were by Alan Toussaint from Right Time and Right Place album, you know.
Yep.
And now suddenly we were in a whole different groove, and it took a minute before we got it. And this is another example of like the camaraderie and the sort of champions that we have in the band, because there was a little confusion and we were having trouble getting a take. And Leon Pendarvis got up from the organ and said, "Wait a minute, let me conduct this, and I'll stand right beside you, Mac, and I'll make sure that we're all on the same page, and that you know where we are and we know where you are." And he did it in such a gracious and beautiful way and so professionally. And then that was the take that we got, that we used. And you know, it's unusual because it's such a strikingly different tempo. And then we used Alan Toussaint's horn parts. If I'd known probably that Mac was going to do it in this new tempo, I think I would have probably written a fresh take on horn parts on the tune. But as it was, Alan Toussaint passed away not long after we recorded the album. And I thought, well, it's only appropriate that we play his horn parts in this different groove, you know. It's another tip of the hat to somebody that we loved and revered, because I worked with Alan Toussaint a lot over the years, and he was an elegant and wonderful man. So all those kind of things, there just seemed to be a little bit of a magical quality towards the whole way it came together, and we're proud of it and we're happy about it. You know, we feel like whatever else it is a really honest portrayal of this band as it is now. And It's a great band, man. And not only that, we have achieved a rare harmony. You know, the Blues Brothers band, over the course of its years together, was a volatile group in a lot of ways. There were very strong characters, and we used to have some some really intense scenes, you know. But over the past, about the last 6 years or so, we changed managers, and we have a guy from Nashville who's our road manager, and his name is Keith Thompson, Cowboy, and his professionalism coupled with the maturity of the band and just the harmony of it.
Yeah. I like that one, You Left the Water Running as well. It's another one I liked.
Yeah, and that was, that was, as a matter of fact, my wife and I were watching the Ken Burns Vietnam show, and at the end of the episode about 3 nights ago, they were playing another Otis Redding tune, and I was listening to it, and I said, that's got to be Duck and Steve. And I immediately looked it up on the internet, and sure enough, it was Duck and Steve and Al Jackson playing. And so, Steve's association with Otis Redding, and it was Steve who suggested that we listen to the version that Otis did with just acoustic guitar. And that was the reason that we used acoustic guitar in the beginning of that tune. So, all these little things. There's just there's almost a story behind every tune.
What's the story behind Sex Machine?
Well, now that was funny because we had no idea that Eddie Floyd was going to have this "Don't Forget About James Brown."
Yeah.
And when we heard it, we were like, "Oh man, we got to do that," because James Brown died, and now he's off the map in a way. You don't hear his music on the radio, and especially for my generation of musicians, James Brown's band, the grooves and how funky they were was So we felt like, yeah, we got to do that. And then Paul Schaefer was our original piano player, and he was also supposed to be in the movie and act in the movie. And right when we literally, it was only a few days before we were heading to L.A. to start the movie, or to Chicago, where we started doing the recording. We find out that Paul was not doing it, and that was because he had been on Broadway with Gilda Radner, and he was going to be forced to leave her show. And I really think he sort of had a lot of pressure put on him unfairly, and he ended up staying and passing on the Blues Brothers, which was a drag because we had to get a new musical director, a piano player, and an actor. And Murphy Dunn, who has been performing with us in the last couple of years, which has been a delight.
Yeah.
He ended up acting, and my friend Larry Willis, the great black jazz piano player who I had played with in Blood, Sweat, and Tears, actually played all the piano parts. So it's Larry that's playing on the soundtrack. And as a matter of fact, we thought that we were trying to convince John Landis to, when Murphy plays in the credits at the end of the first movie, when each one of us has our little cameo, that they should have a close-up of Murphy's face, but then when they go to the piano, they should have Larry's hands. But he wouldn't go for it. So it was, I wanted to get Paul back involved. Yeah. And when I mentioned it to Paul, he was excited about it, and he immediately knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to do Sex Machine, and because there was a great version of James Brown doing Sex Machine with the Letterman Band in about the third or fourth year of the show, sort of an iconic performance that was just burning like crazy, and so Paul wanted to do it, and I think we equaled the burn, man. That tune is smoking.
Yeah. Great tune. Yeah, you do a lot of work with the horns and the saxophones. And what made you favor those instruments?
my dad was my first teacher, and he started me off on the clarinet when I was a kid. My dad was a wonderful musician, a great teacher. In fact, I think he's probably the best teacher I was ever around, and that includes some great teachers, I'll tell you. But my dad had a knack. I have a young friend. He's not so young anymore, but he's been playing with the Average White Band for over 20 years, and his name is Fred Bigdor. And Fred is a terrific musician. And when he was in his early 20s, he was taking some lessons from me, and because I had done a clinic at his university up in Connecticut, and that's how we met. And he said that he wanted to play flute, and asked me if I could give him some flute lessons. So, of course, I said yeah. And my dad happened to be here visiting from North Carolina, where he had retired. And, I'm in my practice room where I am right now with Fred, and I can't figure out how to help him, how to clue him into getting a better sound, So I walk out into the dining room, and my dad is sitting there, and I said, Dad, would you come in and help me with Fred for a minute? And my dad spent 10 minutes with Fred, and suddenly Fred had a flute sound. He just knew what to say. So, yeah, that, teaching is, that's something that, in all these debates about education, I always find extremely annoying. It's people somehow have the idea that teachers should be able to graduate from school and immediately come and know all there is to know about teaching. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that all the good teachers that I've been around say is that you have to learn to say the same thing 100 different ways.
Yeah.
In order to key in with kids. And let's face it, anytime any human being has had a good teacher in whatever field it is, whether you're an auto mechanic and you're mentored by a ace auto mechanic, or a musician who's mentored by a great musician, a great teacher is a singular thing in your life. You never forget it.
Yeah.
So it was natural for me to, and also I was listening to, my dad he loved the big bands, and Woody Herman and Stan Kenton and Count Basie and Duke Ellington, and he had a lot of jazz musicians friends, and then when after the first year or so, a couple of years, when he saw that I was really serious and I was practicing and I had talent, then he had me do a wise thing. He had me study with one of his best friends, a wonderful saxophone player in Ohio named Frank Corby. And Frank lived to be like 87 or so, and I played with him often in his 80s because he retired to North Carolina, and whenever I would go visit my parents, I'd stop in Raleigh and go hang with Frank, and usually end up playing somewhere with him. So it was like a lovely circular thing. He taught me in my teens, and then 50 years later, we were playing together again, 40 years later. Really nice.
Yes. I notice Matt Guitar Murphy is on the CD now. Did you have to ask Aretha Franklin to let him go because he was he was very, very bad in that movie, walking out on her?
Yeah, no, he slipped under the radar.
I love that scene in the movie where, he walks out there and she's like, you're like looking at her waiting for permission. She goes, well, go, damn it. And you rush out of there like.
I have somebody, I was looking at it yesterday, as a matter of fact, on my, I keep all my my backstage passes,
Yeah.
So I have hundreds of them, and I have them hanging on a cabinet. And also I have two fans that, fans to like for hot weather, that kind of fan.
Okay.
Two painted fans that that Blues Brothers fans have given me, and one is of me and Aretha, and it is precisely the scene that you're talking about. And whoever did this captured it so beautifully. because Aretha has this look on her face. She's sort of bugged, and she's looking like, oh, Jesus. And then I have this look on my face like I'm holding the horn, I'm waiting, afraid to say anything. It's a funny thing, my ex-wife told me that she never saw that look on my face ever. She said that was a first time look. I said, well, you don't usually get Aretha looking at you and say, damn it, go ahead.
And I love that you're up on the counter there. I love that scene in the restaurant, where they find you and Matt Guitar Murphy, and you're up there on the counter. And I love those shots where the camera's aimed up at you, and you're doing some pretty mad playing up there. I love those shots, and I know yeah.
There's a funny story about that because we rehearsed for a week in a dance studio,
mm-hmm.
and there was a very good choreographer. He was a beautiful guy. I don't recall his name now, but one thing that I determined to do was to learn to play my solo while I was dancing, because so often you see movies, and one thing that has always bugged me is that you see a movie and in the background there's musicians playing and there's a saxophone solo going on, and the saxophone player, the actor, is holding the saxophone but he's not playing. And the next thing you know, you look up and he's playing, but there's no longer a saxophone playing, So I determined that, man, I'm going to play the solo while I'm dancing, So I learned to play my solo, which had been recorded already, while I was doing the dance. But then when we went into the set, that counter is almost chest high. It's not like a normal counter.
Mm-hmm.
And there's where the stools sit are like a foot off the floor. So, it's one thing to stand on a lunch counter that's like waist high, that are like a normal lunch counter. But being up there, also, it was narrow. And all of a sudden, this dance that I had learned to do on a big open dance floor, now I'm having to do on top of this counter. And behind me is stoves and pots and pans and stuff. And I think if I fall, I'm going to fucking kill myself. And then one of the cameramen says, he looks at one of the angles and he says to Landis, the director, he says, we can't use this angle because they didn't finish the ceiling in part of the back of the set. And so if I aim up at Lou from this angle, I could see the back, And so they had to shoot me some of the time straight on, and sometimes my head is clipped, and I was bugged about it when I saw it. Landis says, oh, well, don't worry about it.
Yeah, John Landis, of course, just came off National Lampoon's Animal House. And again, the Blues Brothers, I think, in my opinion, he's done a lot of great movies, but I think the Blues Brothers might be his greatest achievement. And, what was he like to work with as a director?
Well, for one thing, he's a lovely man. And we were in both movies. He loves jokes. And he knows a lot of jokes, but in all candor, he's not a great joke teller. But in the band, Duck Dunn, Steve Cropper, myself, we know tons of jokes and we can tell them. And especially like Duck and Steve with their Southern delivery, they used to just crack us up, And we would have joke-telling marathons on the set, just joke after joke, because that's one thing that happens when you have people who know a lot of jokes. Somebody tells a joke, and that reminds you of another joke, and then you tell a joke, and that reminds your friend of another joke, and so it just gets into like a snowball effect. And Landis was very cool to work with. We had a lot of fun with him, and there's another part of that too, and it had to do with Danny Aykroyd and Belushi, and their sensitivity and their generosity, and that is that I remember an assistant director that I got to know told me that when they found out that the musicians were going to be actors in the movie, they were a little horrified, and they thought, oh boy, who knows what we're going to get here, And then he told me that once we started doing the movie, that when we were on set was their favorite time, and we had a lot of funny scenes with all those guys. But also he told me, after I got to know him better, he said, you guys should realize that you are first-time actors in a big motion picture. And he said, nobody in your position gets treated the way you guys are getting treated, because normally you would be occupying a much lower stratus, and status than you're enjoying, courtesy of Aykroyd and Belushi and their insistence on giving us first-class treatment. So then we had our own trailers. We were treated nice. We had a great time. In fact, as I look back on it, they were radically different experiences. The second movie, we were in Toronto almost a whole summer, and a lot of years had gone by in between, and everybody was much more adult. And one thing that I did was that anytime any of the other guys in the band were on set, I went, and so I was going to the studio almost every day, at some time or other. And when I went, one day I got to know the carpenters, I got to know the wardrobe people, I got to know the sound guys, I got to know the stuntmen, because one of the stuntmen actually had taken a few lessons with one of my esteemed colleagues, a great saxophone player, Michael Brecker, who passed away a few years ago. And Michael was a virtuoso. He's sort of, we all recognize him as the dean of our contemporary era of saxophone playing. And he had actually taken a few lessons from Mike. And so he took a few lessons from me. And so I got to know the stuntmen, so I sort of educated myself into what it is about making movies. And I'll tell you one thing I found. This Canadian crew, they were so professional, man. And when you look at their devotion and their super high level of craftsmanship, you realize that the difference between a good movie and a bad movie lies in just a few people. The script writer, the director, and probably depending on how much leeway the director gives the cameraman, because usually the directors sort of have an idea about what they want the film to look like, because everybody else is just doing their absolute best to make it great. I came away with so much respect for them. And I remember that when we were doing the scene where we're all crammed into the car together, and we were all crammed into the car together. And we did that scene, and it was a lovely afternoon. It was about 3:00 in the afternoon, and Landis comes to the window of the car, and he leans in and he says, "Okay, cut. You guys are wrapped. That's it." And I realized that my summer, my 3 months of making a movie had just ended. I was really stricken. I felt a real pang of sadness. Yeah. Because it had been so wonderful, and the people had been so lovely, and it had been such a great adventure doing it, and so much fun hanging out with all these maniacs, and it was a great experience, man. Really something else.
Back a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, Dan Aykroyd was here in Fredericton doing a wine signing. And I have my picture taken with him. He signed my Blues Brothers DVD, which I thought was pretty cool.
That's great.
Oh, yeah. And, do you have any stories about him and John Belushi, of course, who was just extraordinary talent? You see him in Animal House, and you see him in Blues Brothers. Just one of the greatest talents to come out of Saturday Night Live. It's so sad that he had this dark side to him. Yeah.
Yeah, he had a romantic idea about living dangerously, and the rock and roll poet, in the tradition of the English poets and the rock and roll crazies, you know, pushing the envelope. He had he one of that was one thing about him, you know. Usually, if people are getting high, if you get too high, you sort of get scared and you ease up. But with Belushi, it was the opposite. He would get to that point, and that was his signal to push on. You know, he was fearless and crazy with that. You know, I saw it a few times. But there was another side of him that was so funny, and man, he was the kind of guy who he looked into your heart. You know, he was a very sensitive human being, and I think that's one reason why people loved him so much. That was evident in him. You know, he and I remember being at their place in the first movie. They had a house that they were hanging out in Hollywood somewhere, and I was there one afternoon, and Belushi produced this Sony professional Walkman, and that was the days when everybody was using the handheld Walkman, you know, the one that had the microphone built in. Well, this was the professional model. It was like flat, about the size of an iPad, except much thicker, and it had a microphone and a separate microphone, and it was really it was a good piece of equipment, you know. And so Belushi says, "So how do you like this?" And I said, I don't know. I've never seen it before. And he says, "What do you mean? Didn't you guys get these?" And I said, "What do you mean, you guys?" You know, he says, "The band. And you guys all get one of these from Sony?" And I said, "No," or from Atlantic Records. And I said, "No, not to my knowledge. Nobody's gotten one." He says, "Well, Aykroyd and I have them. Why don't you guys have them?" And so our road manager was there, and John asked him to call up the contact at Atlantic Records, and he called up, and you know, he sounded the guy about where's the guys in the band's cassette players, you know, and the guy said, "Well, you know, we only got them for you and Danny," and John says, "Yeah, but the Blues Brothers band is all of us, you know." And the guy says, "Well, we can't afford to just give out these Walkmen to everybody." And he says, you know, we gave them to the Rolling Stones. We only gave them to Mick and Keith. And I remember Belushi saying, "Well, this isn't a blankety blank Rolling Stones, you know." And he said, "Well, we're not keeping them. If everybody in the band doesn't get one, we ain't having them either." And so he hung up the phone. And the next thing you know, the road manager's name was Morris Lida, a great guy from Oklahoma, I think, originally. He immediately was on the phone, and the next thing you know, Belushi and Aykroyd were donating those cassette players to the retired actors' home in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I felt bad that Belushi had the dark side, but I've heard stories about him and his musical side, and he had great insight, not just into blues, but in other side. Like I heard that him bringing Fear onto Saturday Night Live, and that's a punk band, you know? It's like, it's got tremendous.
I was playing on Saturday night when they played, and I remember we didn't have too great of an opinion of them, but the saxophone player at the end of the gig came up to me and he said, "Hey, Lou," he says, "you know, I'm a jazz player, actually." He says, "But I'm just playing in this band." And he says, "I'm really happy to meet you." And so it sort of provided a different window into what they were after, you know. But you know, also Belushi, like for instance, on is it Made in America, the one with the red cover where we do Going Back to Miami? Steve Jordan plays a drum break on Going Back to Miami that is so complex, and Belushi comes back in after that drum break, like with a degree of rhythmic accuracy that's really impressive, man. He nailed it, you know, and he had great time. Belushi did. I wish, you know. I wish we had access to the tapes, because when we made the first record, we recorded 10 nights at the Universal Amphitheater, So there's a lot of takes. I'd love to hear some of the alternate takes of Belushi, you know. But both of them, you know, like Danny used his acting ability to assume a character and make it big, and Belushi really had a vibe, man. He was a talented guy. He knew how to do it. He knew how to sing. He was a natural. You know, when we were in, we did a big tour, and we were in Denver, Colorado, and I was a four-wall handball player here in New York. I used to play four-wall handball all the time, and I happened to, you know, the squash rackets courts were at the YMCA where I played. The squash courts were in the same area as the handball courts, and I sort of got interested in squash watching the guys play, and then I saw a tournament that was televised on cable, and the world champion at the time was a guy named Sharif Khan. His father was a guy named Hashim Khan, because I was knocked out watching it, you know, and then I looked it up, and his father was like the world champion squash player, like I forget, like 8 times after he was in his 30s. And in the squash world, by the time you get to 30, that's generally the end of your career, because it's so fast and such an intense game. So we're in Denver. Steve Jordan and I are going to the gym in the hotel, and I see a poster of Sharif Khan on the wall. And I tell Steve, if you ever get a chance to see this guy play, he's unbelievable. And we turn to go into the gym, and there's Sharif standing there in person. So we start talking, and we introduced ourselves, and it turns out that he and his family have got tickets to go to the concert the next night. And I said, well, do you want to come backstage and meet John and Danny, you know, and hang with the band? And they said, yeah, you know. And then he says, I'm going to play squash with my dad tomorrow, or day after tomorrow. He says, because his father was the head of the squash department at this the Denver Athletic Club, which was in the hotel we were staying. And he says, you guys want to come and see it? And he says, then he says, would you like to take a squash lesson? And I said, yeah. So when we met backstage, it was at Red Rocks in Denver, which is that classic outdoor venue. It's a fantastic, wonderful place. I played there many times over the years with James. And, you know, Belushi did one of his classic Belushi things. Sharif walks in with his brother Ghoul, with his brother Mo Khan, with his sister or cousin Yasmin. There was like, and they're all Pakistani, you know. So they walk in, and Belushi sees the 6 or 7 of them, you know, and he says, what's this, a fucking terrorist group? That's his opening line.
You know, there's
and this is in 1979.
Okay.
Probably, you know. So, but Sharif invited Belushi to come and take a squash lesson too. And after Belushi's lesson, Sharif comes to me and he says, that guy is a natural. He says, he's just a natural. He's so loose. He said he's got such great hand-eye coordination.
Oh, wow.
So he was a natural in a lot of ways, you know. And then John and I, that's when Sharif says, Hashim and I are going to play tomorrow. You guys want to come and watch? And so I met Hashim Khan, and he signed his book. And he was all dressed in white. He had his feet up on his desk. He was wearing white shorts and a white polo shirt and white tennis shoes, beautiful. He had a little bit of a pot belly, you know. He was like in his 70s then, I think, or 60s. And Sharif, he says, "You want a milkshake? I'm having a milkshake," you know. And so the next thing you know, I'm having a milkshake with Hashim Khan, the world champion, you know. And then he and Sharif go play a 3-game match, and Hashim won the first game, Sharif won the second game, and they were tied at 11 for the third game, and they had to play a tie break. And I can remember that Sharif was going, fight, fight, fight to himself, playing his dad. And that was another thing about it. It was such clean playing, really pure playing, man. None of that blocking somebody or it was just pure magic. The greatest athletic thing I ever saw in my life, and Belushi and I got to see it. And Hashim won.
Mm-hmm.
The old man beat his son. It was great, man. I hadn't thought of that in a while. That was a beautiful memory, and John and I were standing side by side in the balcony watching it. It was amazing, man. Amazing.
Yeah, we sadly we no longer have Belushi. We got great memories of him, but we've lost a few others as well. Carrie Fisher we just recently lost, and John Candy's gone. Do you have any memories of those two?
It's funny that you mentioned John Candy, because yesterday there's a photographer that comes to see James, usually a couple shows every tour, and it takes a lot of photographs. And I remember he had taken a photo of me at Red Rocks where, because of the back lighting, my hair is orange and the wall behind me is blue, and my hair is blowing. It was a real windy night. It's a great photo, and I wanted to find it, and because I thought I'd like to blow it up and replace one of the many that I have on my wall with something different, And I came upon a shot of my ex-wife and I and John Candy together, which I don't have up on the wall because I'm remarried, and it's like. But it's a beautiful photo of John Candy, and he was lovely, man. He was just he was candy.
Yeah,
he really was. He was just a delight to be around. He was so ebullient and was sweet man. Really lovely guy.
I don't know whether it was Murphy Dunn that told me this. It was somebody that told me that John Candy was the kind of guy, when he showed up on set, he'd always ask, what's your trailer like, and he'd always make sure you were taken care of.
Yeah.
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 Do you have any?
It would be nice for all of us to get together, actually, and sort of collectively reminisce at some point, because it opens up a window into your other memories,
Yeah.
Like when we did the scene at Bob's Country Bunker where Belushi makes the speech and he says the next gig will be dynamite, trust me.
Yeah.
That was like 2:00 in the morning in December in L.A.
Yeah.
And in the Hollywood Hills, it was bitter cold and so humid. I remember I was thinking, I'm a New Yorker. I've never been this cold, and here I am in L.A., We were freezing our asses off. And when it came time to do that scene, there had to be 100 people around with the lights lit up, the cameraman, the directors, the sound men, the makeup people, the wardrobe people, the
chicken wire,
electricians, the whole thing, all of that stuff going on. And we're out in the cold, and Belushi's making that speech. And he did the speech, which was like a paragraph long, and he did it perfect, but he blew the last line. And he says, oh, damn it, he says, and then Landis says, okay, take two, so now we do a second take. And Belushi gets like 3/4 of the way through, and he blows the line. Okay, another take. Now he gets halfway through, and he screws up a line. Okay, another take. Now he gets a third of the way through, blows the line. Okay, a quarter of the way through, blows the line. Now it's like he messes up like the second sentence. Another take. Now he screws up the opening word, And I remember that we had a laugh, like a collective laugh on the set that went on for minutes. People got hysterical. There was something so great about it. When he finally got down to the very end and blew it again, blew the first word. It was just the release of it, man. It was one of those great cathartic laughs that you remember your whole life. It was fantastic, man. It was so funny. It was so great.
you have any memories of Carrie Fisher? I don't think you had any scenes with her in that, but
No, but we used to hang out because in Chicago when we were doing the recording, they had rented a place that became like the de facto hangout, and it was a bar.
yeah.
And it was sort of a clandestine bar. It was close to Second City, so it became a real hangout, and so we used to hang with Carrie there, and she was had a very sarcastic and funny sense of humor. I can't remember any specific anecdotes about her, but everybody liked her, that's for sure. She was a favorite.
Yeah, and Henry Gibson gone, and Charles Napier of the Good Old Boys.
He was a cool guy, man.
Charles?
He was very cool.
Very underrated, too.
There's what you realize is what a successful character actor that guy was.
Oh,
and
yes.
he's in so many movies.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Going way back to Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And he was so good playing the good old boy, that especially those back and forth with Belushi there.
Yeah.
And, of course, look at the musicians. I love the fact that during the screenplay, the musicians are peppered in there in specific places. You had James Brown leading the sermon at the church. You had Ray Charles at the music store. And I love the fact that the piano works when he plays it,
Yeah.
And Aretha Franklin at the restaurant. John Lee Hooker, And, of course, Cab Calloway. I hope I'm not leaving anybody out.
When I met Cab on set, I approached him and told him that I was really thrilled to be working with him, and I was listening to him warm up, and he had a very precise vocal warm up, and I said, "Wow, Cab, you really have a big range, don't you?" And he immediately said, like low F to high D or whatever it was. He knew precisely his range. And I went on to tell him that I had worked with him once before, and that was in the 70s in like Long Island, some like country club or some kind of Veterans of Foreign Wars, some funky gig,
Yeah.
And I told him, I always felt bad about that gig because we wanted to do you proud, and the music was so confusing. There were so many cuts, and it was hard to read, and he had a conductor that wasn't that familiar with it, and we didn't play a great gig. The horn players all felt sort of let down because we thought we could have played so much better had we had a little bit more rehearsal time or a little bit clearer instructions as to how to do it. I said, but the one thing that got me, Cab, was that you blew right through it, And he said something memorable. He said, when you got good musicians, you don't have to say anything.
Wow.
And he says, if you don't got good musicians, there's nothing you can say.
And of course, James Brown and John Lee Hooker and Ray Charles, you must have been in awe being amongst this tremendous talent. Aretha Franklin,
It was sort of kaleidoscopic, really.
Yeah.
Or surreal in a way. It was, although, by that time, all of us, when I was in school, going to the University of North Texas down in Denton, Texas, right outside of Dallas, I played for Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Stevie Wonder, the Supremes, the Manhattans, the Four Tops, the Spinners, Lou Rawls, Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, Jack Jones. So all of us, every guy in the band had wide experience playing with a lot of of great stars. So it wasn't like we were in awe of them because we had worked with their either them before or people of their stature, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it was thrilling, you know. It was really thrilling.
Do you think?
I remember when, you know, like that piano intro that Ray plays
Yeah.
on "Shake a Tail Feather."
Yeah.
That is a piano solo that bears repeated listening. He goes, he plays this lick, you know, like this complex little lick that is, you listen to it and you're like, whoa, that was deep. How did he come up with that?
Do you think?
Great.
Do you think Twiggy's still waiting for Dan?
I don't know.
He might be in worse trouble than Matt Guitar Murphy.
that scene, they actually blew up that gas station.
Oh.
And they didn't use it in the movie, but I saw the footage of it, and it looked pretty wild. It apparently it was a lot more intense than they thought it was going to be. It was actually sort of dangerous, I think, the way the gas station blew, and that didn't end up in the movie. As a matter of fact, when we first saw the premiere, we were here in New York, and we had a party here at my house afterwards, and I remember there was a general sense of we were all sort of disappointed because there were scenes in the movie scenes of dialogue and other scenes, like for instance when you see the Bluesmobile with that big speaker on tied to the top of it. Well, we actually shot a scene where Matt Murphy, myself, Willie Hall, I think Bones. I saw the photo. I have a photo of it. One of the still photos from the movie, 8x10 of it. We actually filmed ourselves stealing that off of a big flagpole. It was on top of a big flagpole, and there's the still I have of it is of us looking up at it, and we were talking about, now how are we going to get that thing down from there, you know? So we actually filmed us stealing that thing, but you know that was cut out of the movie, and of course we didn't see some of the big car crashes, and we were sort of disappointed that the car crashes took precedence over our dialogue in the scenes that we were in, you know, because we were in more scenes than actually made the movie. But you know, it turns out to have been such an iconic movie, and people love it so much.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, because of it also, the Blues Brothers Band, we've basically gotten to go around the world for the last, since 88.
Yeah.
30 years, coming up on 30 years of traveling around the world together, since Belushi died, after the movie, once we started back. And because of it, we've gotten to play in places that if we, you know, who knows, if we had done a second movie, maybe when the Blues Brothers tour, we would be like contemporary acts now that carry 30 trucks and giant sets and all that stuff. And if you're in that category, you can't play the places the Blues Brothers Band plays, because we end up playing like in the main piazza of La Coruña, Spain. And so now there's 12,000 people come out to hear us play. Then 2 nights later, we're in a club in Switzerland where there's 600 people. And, you know, and everywhere you go, you play the equivalent of like a 3-county arts summerfest in the south of France. And you're in a village that's a national treasure. And you're invited to the mairie, and now they have a giant table spread with all the cheese and the sausages and the wine and the delicacies of this particular region you're in. You know, we have gotten to experience things that are just extraordinary, and it's all because of this movie.
Yeah. Do you ever feel that I felt kind of bad that James Belushi wasn't brought in on Blues Brothers 2000, because I don't know what happened there, but it would have been nice had he filled in where John was unfortunately gone.
I don't know about that.
Yeah?
I have no idea what went down. So.
You've toured with a lot of musicians. I know you mentioned Barbara Streisand. What was she like to perform with?
Well, she's one of those people that is in a different world than the rest of us, and so you never actually make any contact with her. She comes out, she waves to everybody, but if I'm sure that if she was asked to identify people in the band and there were 5 of us standing there, she wouldn't know whether we were playing for her or not. But she is a tremendous talent, and unbelievable, and a thrill. And I thought it rather odd, actually, that she has a fabled fear of performing, which after that concert in Central Park where she forgot the lyrics or something, and which happens to everybody, that she didn't perform live again for 20 years or 30 years, however long it was. So here's a person, but now that she's got teleprompters, she feels comfortable, So I thought it seemed sort of odd to me that she could be so freaked out by blowing a lyric, yet we would do a rehearsal, and she would come in the rehearsal, and she would say, because she carries her whole repertoire in this giant, big rolling case where there's hundreds of arrangements, and suddenly she says, I feel like doing Where or When, and the version with Nelson Riddle arrangement. I'm making this up, but that's the, so the next thing you know, they produce the arrangement, and then we start to sing it, and we start to play it, and she starts singing. She says, it feels a little too high. And the next thing you know, the copyists have come back. All the charts are scanned. Now they've hit the computers. They've changed the chart to a half step lower, and we play it that night. So she's perfectly comfortable adding a new tune on one rehearsal, but she also stopped performing for 30 years because she forgot a lyric. I remember the second tour that I did with her, the first thing she said when she came on stage was, I hope this works. I haven't sung a note since the last tour. So, most vocalists sing every day and keep their voice in shape. And she's never had a vocal lesson, never, she just sings. It's all totally natural to her. She couldn't make a mistake if she tried, She never sings out of tune. You never, ever hear a note that's out of tune. Ever. She's something else.
Are you in any other movies or just the Blues Brothers?
No, actually, I was in, what's the name of the movie that I was in with Rubin Blades?
I can't think of it. I don't have it right up in front of me, but because I'm familiar with you as a musician, and I knew you was in the Blues Brothers.
What was the name of that movie? It was a pretty good movie and pretty successful, and I had a bit part. I played a professional saxophone player who came in to sub in the band that Rubin Blades was in. I got to know Rubin in that movie, and he's a lovely man. He's a super bright guy too, man.
You still do
gig? What the hell is the name of that? Is it called the Sideman or?
I don't know. I don't have it right up here in front of me.
I can't remember the name of it.
I don't know. I could look it up here if you want.
I'm doing it. You can ask me another question. And
okay, here's a question. You still perform with chicken wire?
No, but the way we have different ideas about chicken wire.
I love the way you delivered that line. You come in there and do chicken wire.
I agonized over that.
Well, you know
chicken
what?
Wire, chicken wire, chicken wire, chicken wire.
Oh, Murphy Dunn applauds it. I'll tell you that. He says it's a great.
Well, you know, it was a friend of mine in Texas who told me that he had worked with for a band leader in Dallas or in Fort Worth that played in a club that was so rough that they had chicken wire in front of the band because if a fight broke out, they didn't want the band to stop playing. It wasn't really to protect the band. Well, I mean, in a way, it was to protect the band, but it wasn't because they thought people would be throwing stuff at the band. They thought if people got in a fight and started throwing stuff, they wanted the band to keep playing while the bouncers got them out. You know, so that's what I told Aykroyd about that. And so my version of chicken wire is that it's because of something that I told Danny about. But Steve Cropper has another version. According to Steve, it's something that he told Aykroyd about. So we have dueling origin stories about that.
I love it when Belushi takes that whip and snaps that cigarette out of that poor woman's mouth. One way to quit smoking. Now, do you ever go back to the LaMotta Room or Bob's Country Bunker?
Well, since Bob's Country Bunker was a set, you know, it'd be hard to revisit that one.
No, Streisand didn't tour there. Yeah, I asked Murphy Dunn if he still goes to the LaMotta Room to perform in those. What was it called? Oh, candy ass monkey suits.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the guys. I haven't actually done these gigs because Murphy has, in a way, been subbing for me. The gigs he's done with the Blues Brothers Band, because he's performed in order for us to have original members on dates that I've had to miss because of the conflict with James Taylor.
Okay.
And, all the guys in the band say that when they bring him on at the end of the show, and he does a couple of tunes, and they say that people just flip out, that the crowd absolutely loves it. So we're intending, now that the new CD is out, we want to try to get Murphy working with us as much as we can, you know.
You know, you and James were in St. John now. Of course, you weren't here in Fredericton, but you came to the Maritimes. We don't get a whole lot of concerts that come through here, but tell us about your trip here to the Maritimes.
Well, you know, the first time that I was in the Maritimes was when I was with Blood, Sweat, and Tears in 1972.
Okay.
And we did I think we did 4 or 5 concerts. I know that we played in Newfoundland because that was the first time that I ever heard, and we had a cab driver because the band was already up. I was doing something else, and I had to fly from New York and join the band sort of the last minute. And we had a cab driver that had the perfect Newfie accent, man, and that guy was so funny and so sarcastic. He had me on the floor of the taxi. I remember that, and I remember that it was in the autumn, and we had spectacular weather, and we were all knocked out by how beautiful it was. But I can't remember whether we played in New Brunswick or not. I think we did. I think we played St. John also, and St. John in Newfoundland, and we played a couple other gigs. But we had a great time, man. It was so much fun, you know. And then I wasn't back until with James. So it was a long time between visits. And the nice thing about this last tour was that we had days off. We went out to see an iceberg from St. John, and that was fantastic. You know, I was amazed at how cold it got. It was in the middle of summer, but once we were out there on the boat, and then when we were in the shadow of the iceberg, and you suddenly felt the intense cold emanating from that thing. Man, it was something else.
When you were in Newfoundland,
Crossover Dreams. That's what the name of the movie was.
Okay.
Crossover Dreams.
Oh, there you go. When you were in Newfoundland, did you get to hear any Newfie jokes?
Yeah, but I don't remember any.
Do you want me to share one with you?
Give me a good Newfie joke.
I'm going to give you one. There's a little bit of profanity in this, but that's fine. There was you'll love this. There was an Englishman, a Frenchman, and a Newfie, and they were in a nightclub one night, and they were getting plastered drunk. And the Englishman, you know, he's the least drunk of the three, and he says, "You know what? I'm going to go pick up that blonde over there." And of course, they don't think he can do it. You know, he's had a little bit too much to drink, but you know, he's still got his senses. So he goes over to this blonde, taps her on the shoulder, and he goes, "Tickle your ass with a feather." She turns around and goes, "What?" He goes, "Particularly nasty weather." And she kind of looks at him and smiles and takes him by the arm and walks off with him. So the Frenchman's like, oh, okay, works for him. He's a little more drunk than the Englishman, but he thinks he can get his mojo on. So he finds this brunette, and he walks over to her and taps her on the shoulder and goes, "Tickle your ass with a feather." And she turns around and goes, "What?" And he goes, "Particularly nasty weather," in his French accent. And she looks at him for a minute, and she kind of gets it, and she takes his arm, and she walks off with him. So the Newfie, you know, he is barely able to stand, and he's using the bar to keep himself on his feet, and he practically staggers and crawls over to this redhead that he spots, and he walks up to her, taps her on the shoulder, and she turns around and he goes, "Shove a feather up your ass." And she goes, "What?" And he goes, "Fucking cold, isn't it?"
I imagine in the Newfie accent that would even be better.
Yeah, I could just imagine. But no, I always remembered that Newfie joke. It's just a total twist on how those words come out. But I never forgot that one. I thought that was funny. But yeah, I'm glad you got a chance to come up here. And this CD, as I said, was fantastic. I'm really excited about it, and I hope it does well. You know, it's funny because the day after I reached out to you for an interview, the very next day I reached out to Steve Cropper and never heard back.
Yeah, well, I'll put the word in to Steve.
Yeah, you tell him that I know he's probably at the LaMotta room because he likes those suits, but
I got my suit. I managed to get my suit from the second movie, and I have some of my stuff from the first movie.
Oh yeah? What do you have from the first movie?
I have my my jacket.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the credits.
Yeah.
Of Crossover Dreams.
Yeah.
And I don't see myself, man. I'm sort of bugged because I'm definitely in the movie.
Wow. Well, you're definitely in the credits for the Blues Brothers. They didn't leave you out of that.
No, they didn't mess with me on that. No, that's a drag because I play a saxophone player who comes up, and I have a line.
Yeah. Tell me.
But I'm looking at the whole cast, and I don't see Lou Marini in there. I'm going to have to lodge a formal complaint. I'm going to call Rubin. Yeah. Hey, man, I'm not in the credit.
Speaking of credits, Alan Rubin is no longer with it. You got any memories of him?
Well, more than I can. You know, Alan and I were very close, and he was an unusual man. For one thing, he was a virtuoso trumpet player,
mm-hmm.
And he was also he was sort of like an archetype of the hip New York City Jewish jazz musician. You know, he had the quickest mind, and I think Alan's probably the funniest guy I've ever been around. He could. We would be in Japan, and you know, playing the Blue Note in Tokyo, spend a weekend in Tokyo, and every night at the hotel, I used to buy these big bottles of sake, and we used to have yukata parties where everybody would put on their yukata robes and come to my room, and I carried this big Cambridge sound system, and we would, I don't know why they didn't throw us out of the hotel. We would be blasting the music and laughing and talking, and inevitably every single night Alan would get on a roll about something, and depending on who was there, whether it was at the beginning or the end, he would have everybody just falling on the floor. And I can remember a few times where it was just he and I, and he got me laughing so hard that I actually was on the floor, holding my arms, you know, my sides, and helpless with laughter. And I remember that he would be standing above me, and I have this image in my mind of a cat playing with a mouse that he's caught, you know, and just about the time you catch your breath, he says something else, and you're gone again, you know. And I can remember saying, "Stop, you know." Like, he was a brilliant guy, and also so great to play with. You know, there's a thing about lead trumpet players. A lot of them, they play things a certain way, and so you follow them. And with Alan, it was more like a consensus, a very sensitive ability to play the most musical way, and to, although he used to bust my hump too, but everything was so musical with him. He's as far as the mastery of playing a wind instrument, he's the best I ever played with.
One of the funniest scenes in the movie, I think, is where Belushi and Aykroyd go to recruit him, and he's managing that restaurant. And I love it when they get seated at that table, and there's this family sitting around him. And one of my favorite shots, they got that little girl at the table, and she just looks...
Yes, the way she looks.
Yeah, she just looks amused. She just looks amused. And the moment Belushi goes, "How much for the little girl?" and you just see her perk up. Like, I love that shot. Like she suddenly, you know...
I wonder what happened to her. I wonder where she is now, what she does.
I don't know, but I love that show. He goes, "How much for the little girl?" And suddenly she went from joyful to shock. That one shot was just great. And it was, you know, just very natural, you know. But I always get, that still cracks me up, her reaction when Belushi turns around there and addresses her.
Well, Alan went to that scene. He was so worried about it, you know, and about doing it well, and I remember that he ended up hanging out really late the night before, and when he, you know, because Alan had curly hair,
mm-hmm.
and then he was late, so he just slicked it back, and then that became his look. You know, but always, I was just, when I was looking for the photograph that I mentioned to you earlier, I came upon some photos of Alan and I, which I have to get blown up, back in the RCO All-Stars days, which was 78. That's when we played with that great band that Levon Helm put together, the drummer with the band. Levon had a band called the RCO All-Stars after the band broke up. That was Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn, Dr. Mm-hmm. John, Booker T., Paul Butterfield, Fred Carter Jr., and me and Alan Rubin and Howard Johnson and Tom Malone. It was a great band, and we did 2 albums that are wonderful. I have people who have come to me and told me that they wore out their vinyl copy of the RCO All-Stars.
Oh, wow.
They played it until it wouldn't play anymore.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a great band.
Fantastic. So
And those shots of Alan and I, he's got curly hair, sort of funny.
So you guys are going to be doing another album?
Yeah, one thing that we've talked about and we'd sort of like to do is go to the distaff side of the Blues Brothers. And I'm not sure that we could get Aretha to record with us. Maybe she would, but we do want to get some female singers to sing with us this time, and one of them is Bernice Thomas,
Okay.
Rufus Thomas's daughter. Because Rufus played with us a few times, and of course Crop played with Rufus and with Irma, and we'd like to get Irma too to do a guest shot with us. But we'd like to the next one we want to feature some female R&B and blues artists, so that we can honor our feminine cohort.
What about Aykroyd?
Aykroyd, I have no idea the reason why. I had invited him to play some on the CD, and he declined respectfully.
Okay.
And we've a couple times had some big gig opportunities that were contingent upon his participation, and he's always very amiably but firmly said no. So we're certainly cordial, and anytime that I see him or speak to him, it's always just like it's always been. But no, he doesn't seem to want to revisit our side of it. I don't know why.
That's unfortunately. And of course, Judy Belushi. It's nice to see that she is still active in this as well. Unfortunately, John is gone. I have reached out to see if she'd come on here, but with the Animal House going to be 40 years old next year. Jeepers, I can't believe it's been 40 years. I would have been 6 when that came out. I would have been 8 when the Blues Brothers came out. Oh, yeah. You're still 39, I know.
Yeah, in my mind.
You still got the long hair, right?
Yeah, actually, a lot of people tell me that I look, except for the color of my hair, that I look pretty much like I always looked. But I'm lucky. I'm in good shape. I weigh pretty much the same weight as I weighed when we did the Blues Brothers movie. I'm about 5 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
But I'm trim and full of energy, and I'm in very good, knock on wood, very good physical condition. So I'm looking forward to a lot more years of doing this, Because, one of the nice things about being a professional musician is when you have to go to work, I tell my wife, I got to go play. And the fact is that I've spent my whole, since I'm about 14 years old, I've been making my own money playing my saxophones and flutes and clarinets. And basically I've spent my whole life in the company of great musicians. Even when I was 16 or 17 playing, and my teacher was a wonderful player, and I was playing with him, and there were some other wonderful players around Ohio where I grew up, and so I was playing with them. And then when I went to school at North Texas, my freshman year, I started playing with a great trumpet player named Don Jacoby, and he had been first trumpet player with Les Brown's orchestra, and he was a virtuoso trumpet player, and the other horn player in the band was a guy named Bobby Burgess, Butter Burgess, and Butter had been the lead trombone with Maynard Ferguson, a Canadian, by the way, mm-hmm. and Woody Herman and Stan Kenton. And so as an 18 or 19-year-old, I was standing in between two monster players. And, it didn't occur to me at the time, but I must have been pretty good, or else they wouldn't have, I wouldn't have been standing in between them. But I've spent my life in the company of these wonderful not just wonderful musicians, but wonderful, funny, crazy people. And it's like I count my blessings, brother. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Wow. All these years later, the Blues Brothers, it's approaching 40th anniversary come 2020. And wow. What do you think of that? All these years later, you can never predict a movie doing that. And I think it's the greatest movie to spring from a Saturday Night Live gig.
Well, one thing that Steve and I always say is that if anyone had told us in 1978 that in 2017 that Steve and I would be celebrating a new CD release with the Blues Brothers Band, we would have told them that they were out of their minds. That's for sure. No, it's been. I've often said this. One of the things about talking about these things, and especially talking about your life, is, and I come from a Southern heritage. My mom was from North Carolina, and I grew up in the company of my uncles and grandparents who were Southern-style storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned the art of telling stories, and one thing is you find the best way to tell the story by oft repeating it, and so it gets more concise, and maybe it becomes less truthful. Who knows? But at any rate, you hear yourself say these things, but it's actually the best way to say it, and that is that the Blues Brothers Band is the world's greatest part-time job.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's a phenomenal movie, and the original soundtrack, still fantastic, and this CD, The Last Shade of Blue Before Black, I urge everybody to check this out. Like I said, somebody shook my hand yesterday when they saw this, So he was pretty impressed that I was going to be talking to you, and he was talking about Steve Cropper and all these people.
If that local record store, they need to let Severn Records know. It's called Severn Records, Severn. It's a Sony affiliate record company that puts the CD out. So, naturally, we'd love it if people bought the CD. That's for sure.
Absolutely. You got a web page? You want to plug that on here?
Oh yeah, my personal website is called blueloumarini.com. And it usually has my schedule and wherever I'm playing. Although I have to admit that, Lou Soloff and I used to talk about how much money we've made over the years in the music business, and the fact is we still don't have any money. And that's, I was, this not too long ago, where were we? We were in some gig in Spain, and, there must have been like 30 people came up to me and said, Lou, we want to buy one of your CDs. And I'm like, I forgot to bring them. And
wow.
So Lou Soloff and I used to say, that's why we're in the position we're in today, because we don't have a business sense. So my ability to promote myself has been pretty non-existent over the years, but I seem to have done all right in spite of it.
Yeah, you involved in any charities or anything you want to talk about here?
Well, I just, I'm one of those people who every week I send like $50 off to somewhere, to Greenpeace, my wife is always kidding me. She says, she's always going like, save the wolves, save the bears, save the whales, save the, because once you send money to one charity, then you're on all the lists. So you get all this mail, and you can't send to everybody, but like Amnesty International, UNICEF, the Red Cross. I just sent money to. I found a place to send directly to Puerto Rico, and another one to send directly to the Virgin Islands, because my wife and I, in the last 2 summers in a row, have been. Last summer we were in Peter Island off the British Virgin Islands, close to St. John, and the summer before that we were in St. John. And both times we had fantastic vacations, and now that area is just demolished. So I contribute to a lot of different charities. I don't have a single one. I would say that probably UNICEF is the one that I send the most money to, just because it's for children.
It's funny because I'm the same way. I contribute to a lot of charities, a lot of them based on people I've interviewed, and if they're afflicted with something or they know somebody afflicted with something, it's kind of the same deal here too. So, yeah. Well, this is a fantastic CD. I want to thank you for sending this to me. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, I forgot to sign it.
Well,
when next time that we're in New Brunswick, James, you'll come to the concert, and I'll make sure I sign it.
Yeah, you guys gotta extend your course and come here to Fredericton.
Boy, that's one thing that we're hoping will happen with this new CD is that the Blues Brothers Band will get to be doing more touring, because mostly we tour in Europe and Japan, and also Australia. We've been a few times, but we don't do many gigs in the States. That has partly to do with the band that Jim Belushi and Aykroyd had.
Okay.
Even though that's categorically different in the presentation, but they it's sort of a block for us to work much in the States. But we're hoping that'll change with this CD.
Something you could check out, of course it's done now, but usually about once a year here in Fredericton we have the Harvest Jazz and Blues Festival. And Levon Helms performed here in that, and we just had Steve Earle here for that, and
far out, yeah.
Oh yeah. And we always have great turnouts for the Harvest Jazz and Blues,
well,
and that
we should be there.
That would be right up your alley.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I hope that you can make a trip up here sometime, and love to meet you. And I could even bring some chicken wire.
Cheap.
You're not ever going to escape that.
No. Often when people say, I'll be walking along the street and somebody will say, "Excuse me, are you Lou Marini?" And I'll go, "Chicken wire?" And sometimes they don't get it. Sometimes they have this blank look on their face. And I said, "That's my line from the movie, man. Come on."
Wow, they don't know you well enough if they don't catch that line. Wow. Well, we are celebrating this CD again, The Last Shade of Blue Before Black. The next time you get when you get the next CD out, please don't hesitate to come on here. I would love to have you back on.
Well, great. Well, I'll keep that in mind, Greg.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Now, you're on Facebook. You mind if I add you?
Not at all, but I have to admit that there again, I'm sort of derelict. I try to look at Facebook as often as I can, but it's not like people who check it every day. I certainly don't do that. And also, apparently I'm at the limit of.
Oh, do you?
So I have people who see me or call me and say, "Man, what's the deal? I can't get on your Facebook page." And I said, "Well, apparently I have a fan page that you can get on."
Okay.
But to tell you the truth, I don't even know what to do as far as I guess I have to eliminate people, but who do I eliminate and how do I do it?
You don't have to eliminate anybody for me, Nah, I wouldn't do that to anybody, but I do have Willie Hall. I don't know whether Murphy Dunn is on Facebook or not.
I don't either.
But you're my third from the movie, and I've talked to you the longest of the three, so there you go.
Okay, man, I got the prize.
You got the prize. Well, you know what? Before I let you go, I was wondering if you'd do a plug for my show.
Sure. What do I do?
Just state your name and say you're listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise out in New Brunswick, Canada. Can you get all that?
Sure. Say when.
When.
Hey, everybody. This is Lou Marini from the Blues Brothers Band, and you're listening to Greg Gilbert, Python's Paradise, out of Fredericton, New Brunswick. Pretty hip.
Oh, thanks a lot. You got that right on one take.
I'm a pro, man.
Wow. Sometimes it takes some of them 4 or 5 times. Oh, that was fantastic. You know, thank you so much for coming on here. I've been wanting to get you on here for a long time.
Well, now in your emails, did you include the link to the blog so that I can find it? It must be on your email, right? Or
you mean
so
to
all
my?
I have to do is look, to check it out. Well, you'll send me when it goes up. You'll alert me, right, so that I can check it out.
Well, I'll send you the link here. I got a YouTube channel as well, and
Okay.
it'll be a while before this one goes up on YouTube. It'll play here and be featured here first, because the station always prefer I play it here first. My interview with Murphy Dunn is up on my YouTube channel. If you want me to send that to you.
Yeah, send it to me.
Yeah, I hear all the nice things we're saying about you.
Oh, beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, you have yourself a wonderful day, and thank you so much for the beautiful memories.
Thank you, brother. All right, straight ahead.
All right, you keep in touch, and we'll have you back on again. We'll celebrate more blues.
Good. All right.
Take it easy.
Later. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.